welcome to a new episode of MAX101. Today we will be going over call loops. So what is a call loop? Well, it allows the driver of a train to select a signal. But what does that mean? Okay, let's just dive into it. I showed this picture back on the ATS magnets video, and you can see the magnet, and right there in front of it is this board. It's just this large board across the tracks. You'll see these at plenty of stations, and that's what they look like in ballast rail. Now in paved rail it looks a little bit different. It looks like just a little rectangular cutout in the rail. So along just about all of the MAX system, the tracks are at grade, so it's all pretty much street level, which means there's a lot of gated intersections, and there's a lot of protected areas around the MAX where you're not supposed to drive. You're not supposed to ever drive on MAX tracks. To allow control over the gates, these loops are placed in the track, and the driver will have to push the call button or select button to make the crossing gates go down. Although this is not the only purpose of a call loop, to make the intersections go down, but it's one of the most widely used purposes. This here is known as the vehicle tagging system, or VTag. It has two different spellings. And this is what allows the train to get from one switch to another, or from one part of the alignment down to the other part. There are two sets of thumb wheels on the left. One of them is the route code, and the other one is the train ID number. We're not going to be talking about that for now. Right now I just want to show you how the selecting system works. Then you have these four buttons next to it. L and R are for use in the yards to switch left and right tracks. The unlabeled button will cancel a command, and the call button is what we're going to be talking about. On, I believe, the Type 5s and possibly the Type 4s, this button is labeled as select. It's the same thing. So let's dive into the actual operating procedure of the train. So we talked about how to move the train forward and all that. So you will be moving your train from station to station. But let's say you stopped at a station and there's a crossing gate in front of you. Well, that crossing gate is not automatic. What happens is you'll stop your train there and the crossing gates are still up, so the cross traffic is still going. But you will notice that these buttons that I showed earlier, those will light up, which allows you to push the button. So what you do is when you're stopping at the station and you're coming to a stop, your train has to be on top. The front of your train has to be on top of this call loop. And there's something called a transponder under the train. And this is what's picking up the signal from the call loop. And so when your train is over it, then the buttons inside will light up. Your VTag buttons will light up. So now that these buttons are lit up, it means we have successfully stopped on the call loop. Now, what you do is you push the call button or select button, again depending on the type of train you're on. It means the same thing. You push the button, and what should immediately start happening is your crossing gates will start to go down. And after the crossing gates are all the way down, the signal that's at every station, your auto block signal, because in these areas where there's gates, it's almost all, I think it's entirely auto block. So anyway, yeah, the gates will go down and your signal will change to yellow or green. If you don't know how auto block signals work, then you need to watch episode 5 of the series. But anyways, if you're sitting at an intersection, the crossing gates will go down and your signal will change. You can then move forward all the way to the next station where there may be another crossing gate in front of there, and you'll have to repeat the process again. This call button is also what you will use to change preempt signals, which is why the call loops look a little bit different in paved rail, is because it's under the rail. Instead of the box being on top, the call loop is kind of just etched out into the track, So you'll stop your train on there, your VTag buttons should light up, and you can call the preempt signal. Alright, let me go grab my crowbar and let's go remove the cover of one of these. Although I don't think that's legal, so actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw it on the whiteboard. There's a loop of wire under here that's shaped kind of like a figure 8, so it's more of a call figure 8 more than an actual loop. And while this is fine, this is how it's constructed, the only way for your VTag buttons to light up inside the train is for you to be stopped somewhere in where there's actually a loop. So if your transponder in the train is stopped right over the middle of the call loop where the loops actually cross over each other, then you have stopped your train on a dead spot, meaning you won't be able to actually get your VTag buttons to light up. So if you were to go out one day, if you're training or something, and you were to drive a train slow enough over a call loop, your VTag buttons will light up, but you'll get to a spot where the wire in the figure 8 crosses over itself right in the middle, and so your VTag buttons should go out briefly and then back on again. So if you stop your train in exactly the wrong spot, you'll get to the dead spot on the call loop, and so you'll have to pull the train forward slightly and come to a stop again. You'll notice this sometimes if you ride the train, you think you've come to a stop, and then it creeps forward for a second and stops again. That's why. It's because he was going to call the signal, but he stopped on the dead spot of the call loop. And you got to be careful when pulling the train forward and creeping forward on the call loop, because you don't want to overrun the platform. You're already halfway on the call loop. You don't want to go, you don't want to scoot forward so much that now you're just completely out of the call loop. Then you'll have to get out of your train and pull the train back again so that you get in the proper stopping position. I think this is partly the reason as to why the MAX will unfortunately likely never become express and be able to skip a bunch of stations. It's because of this call loop. Let's say you want to skip as many stations as you could. So if you think about it, you start at one station, you press the call button to go forward. That's fine. But then you make it to the next station, and let's say you just want to skip all the way. Let's say you're starting in Hillsborough and you want to go to Gresham. So you want to just do a one-stop ride, which would be weird, but okay, that's fine. So you call the signal at Hatfield in Hillsborough. You go forward, and you make it to Hillsborough Central, the next station down the alignment. You have to press the call button to get the signals to cascade down to the next station. Watch my video on preempt signals if you don't know what I mean. Well, in the amount of time that takes for the signal to register, and by the time you push the call button to the time the signal actually begins to change, you would have taken up so much time that you might as well have just opened the doors and let passengers on and then closed them again. So it's going to take the same amount of time just because of how long the call loop takes and because of how long the crossing gates take to go down or for preempt signals to change. It's a major factor as to why the MAX will never ever run express. Although I suppose the best area for running express would be the Banfield Freeway. There is no call loop from Lloyd Center all the way up to the 82nd Avenue MAX station. That's from 11th Avenue to 82nd Avenue. There is no call loop. So if you are an out-of-service train, you'll press the call button at the Lloyd Center so that you can proceed, and you don't need to stop again until you're at 82nd. So that is kind of nice. Although it's just too bad that the call loops take as long as they do, because and the gates and all this kind of stuff, and that they didn't build the tracks elevated, or that they didn't build a third track, a center track, so that trains can go through, similar to New York system. But that's how it was built. Portland is not as big of a city as New York, and so they figured, well, we don't really need to make the system exactly the same. But as always, I've kind of talked your ear off about this. It wasn't supposed to be whether or not trains can run express. It's supposed to be on call loops. So the next time you find yourself at a MAX station and you notice those gray boxes in the rails, that long gray box, pay attention, because the train will stop right on that. The transponder will pick that up and the VTag lights will light up. But if you are stopped at a station and the train pulls forward slightly, yeah, it may be kind of jarring if you're expecting the doors to open and then all of a sudden it pulls forward a little bit. But that's the reason why that's happening. So, now you know. Now you're more knowledgeable, as always. And so, I will see you soon for the next episode.